Very good evening to all of you. On behalf of Auditing and Assurance Standards Board of Institute of Chartered Accountants of India, I'll welcome you all in today's very important webinar that is on SQM1 and SQM2. So I welcome all the participants of today's webinar, and we have three very learned speakers with us, C. Amit Mitra ji, C. Lalit Kumar ji, and Madam Deepa Agarwal ji. I also welcome all the three learned speakers on this AAFP platform. Welcome to you, sir. Welcome to you, Lalit sir. Welcome to you, ma'am. So as we all are aware that we are covering two very important standards, SQM1 and SQM2. So we are having with us three learned speakers. So it is my proud privilege to share with all of you the brief profile of all the learned speakers. Madam Deepa Agarwal ji is an assurance partner at SR Botley Boy and Associates LLP, and she has over 20 years of experience in auditing, accounting, corporate laws, quality and risk management, sustainability reporting and assurance, and regulatory matters. She oversees guidance and training for the firm's assurance practice, advising practitioner on the application of professional standards and regulatory requirements. She is also the sustainability assurance professional practice leader in her firm and is part of ENY's global sustainability professional practice group involved in the formulation of policies, methodology, and comment letters. Deepa ji is a chartered accountant with 13th rank in all over India and 5th rank in NIRC. Over the years, working with regulators and large professional service firms, Deepa ji has participated in preparation of standards and implementation guidance and comment letters on behalf of the industry bodies in India and the implementation of ISQM. She's an author and speaker at various public forums and conferences. She's also a certified public accounting Australia and a technical advisor at International Ethical Standard Board of Accountants. She's a special invitee on Auditing and Assurance Standard Board of Institute of Chartered Accountant and was a member of Accounting Standard Board and was a special invitee at Corporate Laws and Corporate Law Committee and Accounting Standards Board of ICAI earlier to this. She has worked extensively on publications, projects, and preparation of accounting and assurance standards. She has also worked with the Technical Directorate of ICAI for around 5 years and has contributed to ICAI in various publications such as Guide on Audit Trail, Auditing Standard, Checklist, Working Paper Templates, Guidance Note on Coro, and Background Material on AS16. She has authored 4 publications. She is also a member of Journal Committee of the Bombay Chartered Accountant Society and Regulation Contribution, and she has regularly contributed towards the same. Welcome to you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Now, see Amit Mitra ji. Amit ji is a senior partner with MSKA and Associates and has over 24 years of rich experience in audit and accounting services to domestic and international clients. An ardent speaker in various forums, he possesses rich exposure of IFRS, a lead partner on several listed and large multinational engagements. He has excellent exposure in the implementation of internal financial control framework. He is currently leader of ethics and independence of the firm and also leading the risk and quality function for Indian firm. He's a special invitee to the Audit Assurance Standard Board since 2019 and as part of the subcommittee working on SQM1 and SQM2. He's also a peer review and a technical reviewer contributing to the FRRB of the ICAI. Welcome to you, Amit sir. Now, third learned speaker, C. Lalit Kumar ji. Lalit ji is a chartered accountant in practice with more than 26 years of post-qualification experience behind him. As a chartered accountant in practice for the last 19 years, while Lalit ji has rendered professional services in several sectors of Indian economy, including IT and ITES, telecom, infrastructure, retail, manufacturing, and real estate sectors. The financial services is his core area of expertise. As a partner in this present firm, in addition to the rendering assurance services, Lalit ji also is responsible for quality, assurance risk management, and independence and ethics. In his early years of the profession, Lalit ji worked with the Technical Directorate of Institute of Chartered Accountants of India for more than 7 years. During the association with ICAI, he worked extensively on accounting standard, auditing standard, and has also contributed to important publications at ICAI. He also served the secretary to the Financial Reporting Review Board of ICAI. Lalit ji continues to be associated with ICAI. His recent contribution to the publications include Guidance Note on Certificates and Reports for the Special Purposes, Technical Guide on Conducting Quality Review, and Implementation Guide on Resignation and Withdrawal from an Engagement to perform audit of financial statements. In his free time, Lalit ji also loves to play golf. So brief profile of Lalit ji. Once again, welcome Lalit ji on this WSB platform. So we are having with a galaxy of 3 learned speakers. So without wasting much more time, I request Madam Deepa Agarwal ji, will you please start the proceedings of today's webinar and start your deliberation and give the overview on SQM1. Over to you, Deepa Madam, please.
Thank you, Anilji, for the introduction. Thank you so much. Deepa,
thank you.
Please.
Yeah. Thank you, and thanks, Anilji, for the detailed introduction and the background. And as always, thanks to AASB and to the ICA for this fantastic opportunity to deliberate on the new standards. And thankful to my co-speakers also, and especially the two. Every time I've seen, talking about the new standards, and also a lot of other topics which are very important for the profession. So we will just give an overview about the new standards, and then we will start with some detailed discussion which can help you while you are planning for the implementation of the new standard. I have a few slides, and probably I'll quickly share my screen so that we can have a look at the screen. And Anilji, if you can just let me know once it's visible.
Yes, sir.
Yeah?
Yes, sir. Visible.
Okay.
G.
So the standard on quality management, as the name indicates, it's a new standard on your entire quality management, and it's no longer, it's very much different from. Maybe I just go back to the previous slide only. It's very much different from the existing standard on quality control. Now, we'll keep on highlighting through our discussion where it is different, how it is going to be different. But just to give an overview, it is based on the 3 standards issued by the ISSB, the International Auditing and Assurance Standards Board, in December 2020. They issued 3 standards: ISQM 1, 2, and ISA 220, the revised ISA 220. ICA has issued the 2 standard SQM 1 and 2, and these standards are based on the corresponding international auditing and assurance standards. So as an introduction to these standards, I can say that ICA has raised the bar for quality management through issuance of these new standards. These 3 new and revised standards will strengthen and modernize the audit firm's approach to quality management. And through these standards, the ISSB is addressing an evolving and increasingly complex audit ecosystem, including managing the growing stakeholder expectation. So if anybody's want to do a deep dive into what all these standards are about, so beside these standards, there's a very good implementation guide which is available on the ISSB website. There are some good videos also recorded which can be, can see in post the session if somebody wants to really look into what is the background while ISSB issues these standard. And so ICA also took up this project, and fortunately I got this opportunity to work in the study group. And along with Amit and along with a few others to work on these standards. And definitely it was a lot of learning, because to understand how the entire process of quality management is going to change. So ISSB issued this, and as I mentioned, the objective was to address the public expectations. So obviously, when we talk about the larger set of assurance standards, be it the standards in auditing or the standards on your review engagement or your other assurance standard, they talk about maintaining the engagement quality, which means while you're performing the engagement by following the standards in auditing or the review standards or the other assurance standards, you're expected to follow some principles, you're expected to maintain documentation. However, the difference in this standard is that this is about the quality management at the firm and engagement level, which means the standard is about the maintaining the quality at the firm level, which means your policies, your procedures, what policies and processes have to be in place so that the engagement which are being executed by the firm, the assurance engagement, they are of the highest quality. So just to put it in a very simple language. Obviously, it will challenge it will talk about the independent and challenging mindset of the auditor. It will focus about the structured and communication process. So when we will talk about the 8 components, so the standard has 8 components, and one of the new component is information and communication. So there is a lot of emphasis on the define policies to be in place, communications to the teams, and to make sure that the policies are well communicated and followed. The new standard also talks about detailed monitoring and remediation activities to be followed by the firm. It reinforces the need for robust communication, and it explores the transparency and its role in audit quality. So effectively, the objective was to address the public interest issue. But if I just talk about what is something, is this standard all about is that quality is central to firm's assurance strategy. And I'm sure you will hear a lot more from my fellow speakers because, managing the quality in the firm is not an easy task. So we'll talk about the engagement level quality, what all policies have to be in place when we are talking about maintaining the quality. There is a lot of shift in regulatory focus around the globe. So while ICA has given a detailed time, so it's not that it's applicable immediately. And we'll talk about the applicability date also, the mandatory and the recommendatory timeline. And therefore, you can plan the structured implementation of the new standard on quality management. However, it is important to remember there is a lot of shift in the regulatory focus. So therefore, the expectation is that there has to be a lot of emphasis on the leadership responsibilities. So you will see that there is a lot of focus on the tone at the top, which means there has to be a lot of messaging and the communication and the policy follows messaging has to be coming from the leadership. So and we'll talk about the components in detail, you will see that there's a requirement even to do a self-assessment. So this standard requires the firms to conduct a self-assessment, and therefore they talk about ultimately the leadership has to be taken the responsibility of quality management. So leadership will be held accountable. They will be required to perform a self-assessment, which means that they have followed the standard. They have met the objectives of the standard, what the objectives are being prescribed in the standard. So there's a lot of discussion around the leadership component, and then my colleague Amit will talk about the new standard on the QR. So which talks about the enforcement, the function of the engagement quality review at a firm level activity. So there's something very, very important developments which has happened, and you should read the standards and see how the requirements have changed. So probably I can just talk about the three standards at a high level. So these are the three suite of standard and which have to be followed from a particular date. The first standard which we are going to talk about is in the quality management at the firm level. It deals with the firm's responsibility for having a system of quality management. So it's like an internal control system. So, it's not just the components of the policies or the processes which you used to have in your existing standard on quality control. As compared to that, it is talking about the entire management of the quality system, which has to be implemented by the firm. The firm's SQM creates an environment that will enable and support engagement team in performing quality engagement. So in detail, we'll talk about the components, and then we will have this SQM2, which is your engagement quality reviews. Engagement quality reviews form part of the firm's SQM, and it is built upon SQM1 by including specific requirements for who can be appointed and as the engagement quality reviewer. What are the minimum requirements for the engagement quality reviewer? What kind of entities on which, for example, a firm may have a policy that a listed company should have an engagement quality reviewer. What is the expectation of the engagement quality reviewer? What kind of role he is to play, and the documentation of the engagement quality review. The third standard, which is not issued by the ICA yet, the revised standard is on SA 220. It focuses on quality management at the audit engagement level and requires the audit engagement partner to actively manage and take responsibility for the achievement of quality, especially through sufficient and appropriate involvement throughout the engagement and adherence to the firm's policies or procedures and the requirements specified in the SA 220. So these are the three sort of quality control standards which have to be followed together. So this is something, one has to see what are the amendments or the changes have been made. So today we will focus about the SQM1 and SQM2. If you look at the scope, this slide talks about the various services which are in scope. Very important to clarify that the standard on quality management is applicable to all the assurance services. So be it your statutory audit or be it your special purpose audit or any review of financial statement, for example, the reviews which are performed for the listed companies, the quarterly reviews, the compilation, agreed upon procedures engagement under SRS 4400 or any other assurance engagement, for example, reporting on the controls at a service organization, assurance engagement on GHG. So there's a lot of buzz around sustainability. So the new standard, for example, the ISSB has issued ISSA 5000. So any assurance engagement, whether it's for financial or non-financial reporting, will be covered within its scope. The effective date. So anyway, so the effective date you cannot see on the slide, but we will cover it in our further deliberations. So it is mandatory from April 1, 2026. However, it is recommendatory from April 1, 2025. So dates are very much there in the standard. And as I mentioned, there are good videos which one can see if you want to understand in detail. So maybe, before getting into the objective, I will just talk about some more aspects. So SQM1, I think it is very important to understand the various implementation, how one should approach its implementation. So Lalit will talk in detail about how firms should talk about the detailed implementation, how firms should plan the implementation. The second thing one needs to keep in mind is the scalability provision, which has been kept within these standards. So it's not that it has been kept in mind thinking about that, all types of firm. So everyone, all types of firm have to apply these standards, and therefore scalability provision have been added in the standard. So which means a firm can customize, can develop the policies according to its engagement, according to its applicability. The third thing which I want to mention is about the documentation. The documentation is something very, very important. The SQM1 talks about that the documentation has to be maintained, which means you will have to have your written policies in place to make sure that you have a proper remediation plan, and the all components and everything is being well documented. So probably I'll take a pause here and we will discuss in detail about the other aspects through the questions. So I will hand it over to Amit first and to talk about SQM1, and then we will take up some questions. Yeah, Amit, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Deepa. Am I audible and visible?
Yeah, you're audible.
No, thank you. And this was a wonderful beginning. Of course, these standards are extremely important, and as you rightly said, the regulators now want a very high super quality of the audits, and the intention is not to reinvent the wheel and to see what the Western world or the developed economies are doing and try and see if we can replicate that here in India. Deepa, will it be fair if I ask few questions on SQC on SQM1? Will that be okay?
Yeah, or probably you may want to talk about SQM2 first, and then we can come to the questions.
Sure. Okay, that's fine. Okay, so from SQM2 perspective, the starting point has to be SQM1. SQM2 is a subset of SQM1, and as the effective date for both the SQM1 and SQM2 it is recommendatory from April 1, 2025, which gives us a lot of time, even from now, to plan our way forward. And from effective from April 1, 2026, this will be mandatory, and this is applicable to audits and reviews of the financial statements and other assurance and related service engagements. Now, from a transition perspective, very, very quickly, someone may want to say that, I mean, SQC1 was already there. Were we doing something which was wrong, and what was the need for the change? So one thing, as I said in the beginning, was to see whether are we in sync with the way the other territories in the world they're performing, they're controlling the audit. Now, excuse me, the answer to that is that of course, we were not doing anything wrong. We are not doing anything wrong, but there are certain areas of improvement and there are certain catch-ups which probably we need to do. Now, from a transition perspective, of course, SQC was standard on quality control. SQM is the standard on quality management. Now, when we say standards on quality management, there is, of course, this terminology change from quality control to quality management, which means the focus will now be more on risk management. SQM2 primarily emphasizes on the risk-based approach to quality management, requiring the firms to identify and respond to the risk that may have impact on the quality of their engagements. And then the leadership and culture. Deepa briefly touched about the leadership. Now, there is a very, very strong emphasis on the role of the leadership in promoting the culture of quality within the firm. And there are various parameters, both defined in SQM1 as well as in SQM2, highlighting the importance of the top management commitment to the quality. Third one is, of course, the focus on the ongoing monitoring. So ongoing monitoring is something which is, there was monitoring which is post-mortem. Ongoing monitoring is contemporaneous, and then there are certain references in SQM2 which basically requires continuous monitoring. Primarily, the objective is to ensure that there is significant improvement in the quality management system. There are remediations, there are root cause analysis done, and then the necessary actions are taken. Then the auditor's favorite topic, documentation and communication. Of course, no deliberation is complete without touching upon the documentation and the communication. There are significant emphasis now being placed on the documentation and communication related to how do we demonstrate that a particular process was done and then it is documented well. And then the timing, nature, timing, and extent of that. So overall, the transition from SQC to SQM1 is a shift towards more transparency, towards holistic approach, towards more involvement of the leadership. And the whole idea is to ensure that the quality is maintained. The premise is quality. Okay, now as far as the scoping is concerned, of course, it looks simple that one would need to appoint a EQR. There are certain guidelines. When do you appoint an EQR, and then what would that EQR do? But if you go through the standards, I mean, it is a 21, 22 pages standard, plus there is the preface to the standards, which is also extremely important as to what was the reason, what was the purpose, what was the scope of all this. Moving to the scope of SQM2, of course, the scope is to ensure that the appointment and eligibility of engagement quality reviewer, what would be the eligibility criteria, how would that be appointed, then the engagement quality reviewer's responsibilities relating to the performance of documentation as well as the actual review process. So this standard now extends to some very clear guidelines and principles as to how the demonstration of the EQR activity would now be expected. Now, this SQM applies to all the engagements to which SQM1 is applicable. Of course, this is expandable. One would need to do a selection in terms of, besides the listed entities, one would do, the firm are independent to form their own independent assessment as to what would they want to be covered as part of their SQM2. Now, engagement quality review performed in accordance with SQM1 is a specified response to something which is designed and implemented by the firm. Now, which means that the premise is that the firm would need to prepare the policies, the procedures for the partners, including the firm's leadership to follow. Deepa, you want me to complete SQM2 or how do you want to do it?
No, you can complete your opening remarks and then we'll shift to Lalit.
Okay.
We'll take questions.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. Then in terms of, so I talked about the basic premise. So now in terms of the roles and responsibilities of the engagement quality reviewer, one of the important thing is, as I said, that the firm would need to establish the policies and procedures first. This is the step one. Now, when we say establishment of policies and procedures, the basic guidelines are SQM1 and SQM2, basis which the firm would prepare their quality policies, including SQM2 policies, which is the appointment of the EQR. Now, objective, as I rightly said, is quality and the involvement of of the right people having the right skill sets. Now, how do we, when we say that what is the achievement? How do we measure the achievement of the SQM function? Now, the quality engagements are achieved through, again, through planning and performing engagements and reporting on them in accordance with the professional standards and the applicable legal and regulatory requirements. So there has to be measurable guidelines which would need to be further checked and verified in terms of what was the level of compliance. Now, achieving the objectives of those standards and complying with the requirements of applicable laws and regulations, then this will involve exercising the professional judgment and also, in few cases, adequate use of professional skepticism. Now, when we say professional judgment, I will talk about that later. But just to give you the top headlines, professional judgment from a EQR perspective would mean what would be the areas. So of course, besides the methodology and all, what would be the areas you would need to get comfort upon? All the professional judgments taken by the engagement partner and the engagement team, he would want to get comfort upon. Now, what exactly is engagement quality review? Now, well, it is an objective evaluation of significant judgments, as I was talking about, by the engagement team, which means that now this is defined. This is defined in SQM2, which means the documentation of the EQR would also would need to follow this. So I'll repeat. So it's the objective evaluation of the significant judgments made by the engagement team and the conclusions reached thereon. Now, the engagement quality reviewer's evaluation of significant judgment is performed in the context of professional standards and applicable legal and regulatory requirements. However, the engagement quality review is not intended to be an evaluation whether the entire engagement complies with the professional standards, where the complete responsibility lies with the engagement partner. Now, so this is what the engagement quality review is. Now, if we talk about the reviewer, so who exactly are the engagement quality reviewers? What are the eligibilities and all? Now, engagement quality reviewer could be any partner in the firm, of course, not the engagement partner, any engagement partner or any other individual, but that individual has to be a member of the institute. Or it could be an external individual also, but that external individual also needs to be a member of the ICA. Now, this person would, of course, need to be appointed by the firm to perform the engagement quality review. So as I said, EQR is not the member of the engagement team. So which means anyone who's part of the engagement team on that audit cannot be the EQR there. Now, the performance of the engagement quality review does not change the responsibility of the engagement partner. As I said, the engagement partner cannot say that EQR has reviewed this, my responsibility is done, he's now completely responsible. That cannot shift, and it is abundantly clear in the standards. The engagement quality review is not required to obtain evidence to support the opinion or conclusion on the engagement, but the engagement team may obtain further evidences in responding to the matters raised during the engagement quality review. Now, the difference is clear. So difference is that the EQR may provide may request the engagement team or may ask the engagement to perform certain additional procedures. However, on the flip side, EQR is not required to obtain evidences to support the conclusions on the engagement. Now, there is this mention on the ethics, the requirement of the ethics, and then when we talk about the establishment of policies and procedures, and then we talked about the appointment of the EQR. We will have to talk about the ethics, and one of the important thing is the cooling off, which is kind of one may want to kind of take advantage. I'm not saying anyone would want to do, but there may be situations where there's someone who's rotating out of the engagement team, and then for the purpose of ease, or for the purpose of the fact that the person would be aware of the legacy matters, it gets very tempting that the same person or anyone from the engagement team would become an EQR on that. Now, this is governed, this has to be governed by the code of ethics of the ICAI. There are certain cooling off conditions given. Primarily, I mean, there are certain permutations and combinations in terms of how many years was the person as an engagement partner, how many years was the person as engagement quality reviewer on that. And then depending upon the cumulative number of years spent, it ranges from 2 years to 5 years. So so let's say, for example, a firm may determine that the engagement partner responsible for performance of audit procedures on the financial information. Now he spent, let's say, full 7 years on that. Now, can he be the EQR? Of course, no. There are cooling off requirements, and the cooling off requirements, as I said, depending on how much was the cumulative time he had spent, it would range from 3 to 5 years. Now, another point that comes to mind, and of course, which is not related to this, but the group audits I'm talking about, which is slightly a more debated topic these days. So I'll just briefly touch upon that. Now, there is an example which is given in the standard. So I will need to cover that, which basically talks about, can, let's say, someone who is associated with the component audit. So when I say component audit, I mean the audit of the auditor of the subsidiary company. The auditor of the parent company or the holding company, I will term it as the principal auditor and the component auditor. So let's say if someone who's been associated or been the partner of the component audit, can he be the EQCR? Now again, if the component is significant, then the response is no. Of course, because we'll have to respect the code of ethics. It has to be, the cooling off has to be taken in the spirit of it. So of course, there are certain guidelines given, as I said, but in the spirit of it, if the component is significant, even if the component is not significant, to my mind, it says you could involve a professional judgment and all. To my mind, it will be extremely difficult to justify someone that he was a partner in the component audit and now he's kind of eligible for being a EQR. So I just thought this would be important. So moving on very quickly on the appointment, as I said, it has to be someone who's part of the firm. If firm does not have someone, then they can hire someone. They can hire an external expert. Now, of course, that external expert has to be competent enough. He has to be a member of the institute. And in terms of, but all these things can happen only if the firm has established policies and procedures set forth well in advance. And of course, there are certain other criteria which are defined. I mean, you can't have someone as a EQCR who does not have the bandwidth to do it, who does not have the time to do it. How would we justify that? So all these softer aspects, one would need to keep a watch, document, and has to be clearly mentioned in the policy. And of course, we should have an appropriate authority to perform the engagement quality review. When I say appropriate authority, I mean, there are situations where an EQR is appointed, let's say a junior partner is appointed a EQR. Now, there could be a reportee relationship with the engagement partner. Now, in that situation where the appraisal is done by the engagement partner, I am not sure how independent will the EQR be. So all these things, the softer aspects, one would need to take care of. And of course, as I said, there are some ethical requirements also. The person needs to be independent of the engagement. He would be, of course, he's not part of the engagement team, but the independence rules would apply. So a stricter version would need to be taken. So we talked about policies and procedures. We talked about he should have sufficient time. We talked about he should have the appropriate authority and the necessary quality to take care of that. Now, one question that generally comes in mind is that is the EQR allowed, or is he entitled to have an assistant? Of course he can, but again, as I said, it has to flow from the policies and procedures laid down by the firm, and that assistant, the responsibilities of the assistant has to be abundantly clear in terms of what will be his responsibilities. He will be reporting to the EQR. Generally, the EQR is the responsible person for for the activities undertaken. We can have assistant, and there are other reasons, other criteria also. For example, if there are certain areas which involve certain complications, you may want to involve an expert to assist the EQR. Now, those significant areas could be, let's say, anything to do with IT related or technology related, anything to do with valuations related, anything to do with engineering related, where the EQR may want some additional comfort or additional sources or resources to review the work of the engagement team. Now, okay. So what will he do? Fine, this is the appointment and what will the EQR do? I mean, of course, we talked about documentation. What will he document? So of course, he's going to read, he's going to be involved in the planning, he's going to be involved in the execution, he's going to be involved in the way the risk assessment has been done. He will understand the engagement, he will go through the communication and the engagement. He will have access to the engagement partner. He can have also access to the engagement teams, and the firm related to the firm's monitoring and remediation process. If that throws certain observations in that particular engagement, certain deficiencies, he will be entitled to get comfort on those respective areas involving the observations noted, and it could be internal review, it could be external review. So this, and again, of course, as I said in the beginning, involvement in the significant judgment. So all these areas, it's a complete ambit of how the work has been performed. And of course, he's also entitled to see how much time has been spent by the senior members. It could be the engagement partner, it could be the engagement director or managers, and whether that time is justified in terms of work performed, and whether the engagement partners or the engagement managers have done the necessary reviews, and the conclusions that they have reached on the significant judgments. What was planned is what was actually executed or not. Okay. So moving on very, very quickly on the EQR appointment, as I said, there were certain conditions in terms of his bandwidth and all those things, and few other softer aspect which the firm should determine in terms of, first of all, the firm should have policies and procedures in place. That policies and procedures should nominate a particular person or a particular committee to appoint a EQR on a particular engagement. Now, what would that do? What would be the criteria? So, of course, few criteria I've already mentioned. I'll not repeat that again. But the other criteria is let's say, the nature of entity, the seniority of the person, the specialization and complexity of the industry or the regulatory environment, and the experience of that particular person. The extent to which the engagement relates to the matter requiring a specialized expertise, which is the IT and all. I mean, we want to appoint someone basis that. And of course, there could be situations where, let's say, if there is lack of competencies or capabilities, then as per the policies and procedures of the firm, there have to be adequate checks and balances in terms of even replacing the EQR. So there has to be provisions for that, and of course that will depend. Lot will depend on the professional judgment and how the review has been performed. I talked about documentation. So documentation primarily, basic premise is, of course, that it has to be sufficient enough. As we say in our auditing language, it has to be sufficient enough to enable an experienced practitioner having no previous connection with the engagement to understand the nature, timing, and extent of the procedures performed. Now, again, for the sake of repeating, the establishment of policies and procedures have to be there, which will drill down as to what would be the basic requirements for such documentation. The documentation would also when I say documentation, I mean documentation by the EQR. there has to be a clear identification of what review has been performed by the EQR, the names of the engagement quality reviewer and the individual who assisted him, that has to be there. And the review dates have to be there, and the review has to be complete before the reports are released. Now, what happens in a situation, and this is again from a practical point of view, if there is a disagreement between the EQR and the engagement partner or the engagement team. Now, again, there has to be provision in the policies and procedures as to what the firm would guide in that situation. Now, of course, the one view of looking at this is that the authority of the engagement quality reviewer, the person who has given the authority, person who has been given the authority to appoint the EQR, he may or that committee may be the right fit to decide on the disagreement between the EQR or the engagement team. Now, in very few circumstances, the firm may want to take external opinion to ensure the right thing is done and right decisions are made in terms of the disagreement between EQR and the engagement partners. Certain other expectation, now timely review. I mean, gone are the days where one would do the review, the planning is getting reviewed 3 days before they sign off, and gone are the days. So timing is extremely important. Timing, it needs to be demonstrated to the regulators, and they're very, very particular in terms of when the review was done by the engagement partner, when the review was done by the engagement quality review, what were the observation, and it has to be done all through the engagement. For example, planning, for example, performing, for example, completion, for example, discussion, and all those minutes would need to be there. There are certain other matters in terms of documentation we can cover separately. Back to you, Deepa.
Thanks, Amit. Thanks for the detailed overview of the requirements of the new standard. I'm sure the audience would follow the new, and especially when you talked about the ability of the firm to even look at the external person if the firm does not have sufficient people, or the various requirements, including the cooling off period. And we'll come back to you, but before that, I'll invite Lalit to speak and to talk about the requirements, the various elements of ISKM 1, and especially the implementation part. Lalit, over to you.
Hello, hi. Thank you. Thank you so much, Deepa and Amit, for those wonderful talks about ISKM 1 and 2, right? Before that, I want to check, Anilji, how many participants do we have right now?
Due to technical glitch, we are not able to find out the number.
Okay.
Questions we are not able to find out.
Okay. I think I was wondering about what is that we are going to cover in 2 hours. Now, obviously, if one thinks that we'll be able to give a download on the entire standard, it's not possible. I think it would be a time well spent today for all of us if we just have a realization of what it is that has hit us as standard on quality management, and few things which are very important, right? I think the first question that a practitioner would today want to know is, does this apply to me? Whether am I required to comply with the requirements of SQM 1 issued by the Institute of Chartered Accountants of India, or can I remain in the SQC kind of scenario? So the firms to which SQC used to apply are the same firms, which will be required to comply with the requirement of SQM 1. For example, if you have a chartered accountancy firm who does not provide any assurance services, assurance essentially would mean issuing tax audit also, certificates also, any other or if you are not doing any related engagements, which could be compilation report or which could be agreed upon procedures reports. If you're purely advisory, you may not be required to comply with SQM1. That's the first thing. Okay. Now, if you are required to comply with the requirements of SQM1, what does it mean? And what should you do? Are the two things that comes to one's mind. The standard is very clear, and the name itself tells that you need to have a system of quality management. And for a moment, leave the technical jargons apart. A system is a machinery that is put together in place to make sure that it meets a specified objective. And I'll give you a very, very simple example of a system. If you're driving a car, your car is a system which is designed to ensure that the passenger reaches safely to the destination if it is driven properly, right? A similar parallel has been drawn, and firms have been asked to design a system of quality management. And obviously, when we talk about system, it is bound to have certain components. There are several components like leadership responsibilities, risk assessment, client and engagement acceptance, engagement performance, resources, information and communication, monitoring and remediation, and then compliance with independence and ethical requirements. Now, these are subsystems which, when they will work together, they will deliver the output which the system of quality is required to deliver. And output would be high quality assurance engagements, high quality audits, high quality reports that are issued by the firm. Now, what are the key things? Step by step, if one has to look at the implementation part, how it is to be implemented. On a broad basis, one has to assign the responsibilities for each of the component to several people in the firm. And who is the person who is going to assign those responsibilities? Is the leadership of the firm, which, as per standard, is ultimately responsible and accountable for the quality of engagements produced by the system of quality management. So that there is a leadership in the firm that will make sure that there is an in charge for each of the component and that component works effectively. The standard says that while there is an objective for the overall system of quality management, there has to be objectives for individual components also. So there are many components. Each component is designed or has to be designed keeping in view the specific objectives that are stated in the standard. So if you are talking about a component, say resources, there are 4 or 5 or 6 objectives that are stated in the standard itself, which says that when the resources component operates in the firm, it should meet all these objectives. The second point, which is very important, is I think Amit and Deepa both alluded to it when they were talking about the shift from the aspect of control. So SQC was standard on quality control. Now this is standard on quality management, which essentially means that each firm, depending upon its size of business, the kind of clients they work with, the kind of environment in which they operate. Considering all these circumstances, will have the leeway to design their own system, because the factors that I have mentioned, the size of the firm, the spread of the firm, the kind of engagements you do, when these factors are changed, the risks also change. Now, the concept of risk is relevant because risk is something that will prevent the system or the subsystem to achieve its objective. Which means what if something goes wrong and the resources component designed in SQM will not achieve the desired objective. And this is what the firm needs to assess. What is my risk that can lead to vitiation of this objective? And then design a response to mitigate that risk. This is what all about SQM. I'll just show you a slide. Maybe we will stop there for a minute or so. I would want you to read it, understand it, and see what it looks like. Is my screen visible now? Please move this window.
Yeah, visible, Lalit. Yeah,
And
you can do a slideshow.
and yeah. Can you, so if you read the screen, it has got several boxes. The first box represents the component, and the component that we are talking about, this is just an example to give you a feel of what it looks like when we talk about SQM1. So the component here is resource or resources. The quality objective which is stated in the standard is that the system of quality management of the firm should ensure that personnel develop and maintain appropriate competence to consistently perform quality engagements and or to carry out responsibilities in relation to the firms of system of quality management. So this is another aspect that I would want to highlight, that the standard does not talk about engagements alone. It also talks about system of quality management. So resources that are devoted by the firm for the system of quality management and for the engagement must be, fully educated and competent. Now, this is what the standard requires. Now, depending upon the size of the firm, the kind of engagements you do, the people from where, the places from where you are hiring people to do your engagements, a risk assessment has been done that whatever training and development program the firm has, it does not support the personnel in developing and maintaining appropriate competencies, as the content is not sufficiently targeted. So for example, if somebody has joined the firm as an article trainee and the person will be required to test cash and bank reconciliation, or go for a physical stock count, the person is being sent to the job without being appropriately trained to perform these functions. Now, what will happen? This person will go at the engagement, will do the job without any knowledge. Whatever documentation might get produced, it may not meet the quality standard. Yes, of course, you may say that it will be subject to a review by a senior, but the kind of time and energy that might go into the review would be enormous. That may, if it is widespread, it may make the engagement economically unviable to have such kind of people doing on the job. So the firm, what is the firm required to do now? This is the risk that has been identified, that people may not be appropriately trained. Now the firm has to respond to this risk. And there are 3 responses that the firm has developed. The first is, there is a proper mechanism that has been established by the firm to identify what are the training needs for staffs and partners. When we say what are the training needs, it includes both topics as well as the timing of delivery when the people are to be trained, right? So that's somebody in the firm will study and understand and say that these are the topics on which we need to train this population. This is going to be target, and this is reviewed and signed off by the relevant person. Then the second response is there is responsibility that has been fixed for somebody to develop prioritized training program. And somebody will develop that prioritized training program and make sure that it is ready for delivery. And firm also, and it is delivered actually. And the firm also ensures that whatever changes are happening in the environment in which the firm is operating, these changes could be the new accounting standards, new auditing standards, new laws and regulations, or maybe in today's scenario, the new orders that are issued by NFRA, right? Assimilate them and make sure that people are trained on those aspects. And then the standard requires to fix the responsibility and accountability for it. So when you test whether all these three things happened during the year, if yes, it happened, was it appropriately done? If not, the standard requires the firm's leadership to hold, in this case, the professional standards leader expertise accountable. So this is what all standard requires, that for each component, stated quality objectives are there. Those are minimum. You can have more. Do risk assessment as per the nature and size of the firm. Develop appropriate response as are reasonable for your firm, and fix responsibility and accountability for people in the firm. So this is what you are required to document, and this is called design. You actually designed responses to a risk for a quality objective for a component. You have to do this for all the components, for all the objectives stated in the standards, which means that one quality objective will have many risks, and many risks will have many and multiple responses. The standard says you must be able to demonstrate this in writing, which means that design should be on paper, and then there has to be an annual testing of operating effectiveness. So the design and implementation, one sample each, 1 year you will get to design and implement, and next year you will go and test your system for operating effectiveness. And this is very similar to, I think Amit mentioned this when he was speaking, very similar to testing of internal controls over financial reporting as is done, right? So same guidance is followed for testing of SQM1. I think this is what an overview could be of this. I would now, ask if there are any questions that people may want to ask. Would be happy to respond. Deepa, Amit, anything else that you would want to cover, or any questions that you may have?
Yeah, probably, Lalit, I can ask few questions, and then let's take a deep dive. As you rightly said that it's difficult to talk about the entire standard in the given time, but I think you explained the structure, which will help the audience in understanding and preparing for the implementation. So I would just take up one or two questions, and then probably I'll come to Amit also.
Yeah.
So when you talk about the new standard, so how the question is, how can firms effectively transition from SQC1 to SQM1 without disrupting the ongoing operation? So there is an applicability date, there's a mandatory, there's a recommendatory date. So how will the firms make sure that the existing policies and everything is not disrupted, because SQC1 will continue to remain in force till the time the new standard is made applicable?
Okay. So there will be no, business will run as usual. You will continue to get new clients, you will continue to deliver and service, you will continue the way that you've been operating. Now, what is that you are required to do to ensure that you are complied with? I think the first thing that you should understand is there are additional components. So if you put heading by heading, SQC and ISQM1 side by side, you will see there are 4 or 5 additional headings that get generated in this, which means firm will have to really think about those aspects, right? So for example, resources. Earlier, SQC1 only talks about human resources. Now, this time, when you read SQM1, resources include technological resources, human resources, and technical, intellectual resources also, right? Intellectual resources would be your methodology, your manuals. Your IT resources would be the way you communicate, your computers, machines, laptops, and then human resources is very well known to all of us. Similarly, information and communication is a new component that has been added, right? So first of all, I think have an overall understanding of what are the new things that have come in place. And the first thing that each firm's leadership has to do is to understand the requirements of SQM1, because unless they have understood the requirements of SQM1, unless they have bought into what is required to be done to make sure that the firm is complying with SQM1, it will be very difficult to implement because this may warrant changes. Once you have the leadership buy-in on what is required to be done, identify the risks, second would be allocate responsibilities. Third, identify risk. See what you are already doing. So most of the things that will come up as risk, a firm would be doing in one way or the other, right? If you are already compliant with SQC1, I don't see anything that will not get covered in SQM1 other than the new components. This may involve time, efforts, and costs for that transition. So business will continue. Deepa is not likely to be, but when you are on the implementation journey, you may come across things that you will realize possibly that the firms could have done better or something was not correct. You need to change the policies and procedures. Because of the significance of the changes, it can be overwhelming. That's why there is a very long rope given to the firms to ensure compliance. And my advice to all my fellow members and chartered accountants is to read it, discuss, deliberate, and start implementing it. This, because believe me, it takes at least 2 years to sign off on the design that you would want to fly off.
And Lalit, probably if I can add, probably when the firms will implement it, I would just like to add, you will realize that might be you following a particular process or policy, but it's not documented. Or the control is there is a maker checker, but then is it functioning effectively? So Lalit took an example about that you identified that you sent a person without training. That is it adequate? Is there a check on that? Is somebody making a policy that person has to be completing a particular training before that person is working on the engagement? And also, as Lalit mentioned, I would like to add that so you need to evaluate what policies and procedure you already have in place, and your policies and procedure may still be relevant and appropriate for the firm's new system of quality management, and it may need to be revised or enhanced. So the existing 6 component, what you have in SQC1, except your risk assessment and your information and communication, the 6 component will be enhanced. You may need to identify additional quality objective as what Lalit explained. And therefore, they will be continue to be relevant and appropriate, but you need to identify the additional components. What are the missing, what are the gaps in that needs to be adjusted before it is applicable. And it is mandatory, I can mention here, it is mandatory from 1st April 2026. However, it is recommendatory from 1st April 2025. And then the annual evaluation has to be done within a period of 1 year following 1st April 2026. And therefore, when Lalit mentioned, leadership has to understand, there is a connect. Why leadership has to understand? The annual assessment or the self-assessment evaluation has to be signed off by the leadership in the firm. The person has to be identified who is responsible, and that person is generally the person carrying the highest authority, might be a CEO or whatever the designation is. The managing partner, the designation could be anything. And obviously that person cannot alone function. And therefore, when Lalit mentioned that the responsibilities have to be allocated. So for each component, you will have to allocate the responsibility. And with this, I will move to Amit, and Amit did a very detailed overview of the SQM2, and he mentioned about the cooling off period and other things. So I have a question for you, Amit, that you mentioned about the engagement quality review qualification eligibility requirement. So can you talk about something which may impair the eligibility of the engagement quality review to perform the engagement quality review? And if you can give an example around that.
Sure, Deepa. Now, as I said, the firm would need to establish the policies and procedures that address those significant circumstances where the engagement quality reviews eligibility to perform the engagement quality review is impaired. Now, so that it has to flow from the policies. And when the engagement quality reviewer becomes aware of the circumstances that impair his engagement quality reviews eligibility, now that could be on account of, let's say, any kind of, let's say, any one of his relatives joining the company, or which primarily is restricted through code of ethics and all. Now, in that situation, the engagement quality reviewer shall notify to the appropriate individual in the firm. Now, again, as I said, it has to be clearly defined in the policies and procedures. And basis that the person who has the authority would then take necessary action. That necessary action is, of course, quite clear. Once this is established that the person has impaired his ability to be a reviewer, he or she will have to be immediately pulled out of the engagement. Now, there could be two situations where the EQR has not yet started the work. In that case, there is no problem. I mean, that person can be replaced easily. The other situation where the EQR has commenced the work. Now, in that situation, of course, it's slightly tricky, but then the standards are very clear. In that situation, also, he'll have to come out of the engagement very, very quickly. So this is the position where we are.
Thanks, Amit. And before I ask the next question to Lalit, I got a question, and probably I can touch upon this. That whether the quality management cover all the engagement performed by the firm, which means we spoke about the assurance engagement, but will it impact the other engagement also? So one thing needs to keep in mind is that SQM1 requires the firm to design, implement, and operate a system of quality management for audit, review. Lalit mentioned about tax audit, so any kind of assurance or related service engagement. Now, in circumstances when the firm perform other type of engagement, SQM1, for example, the consulting or the advisory, SQM1 does not require that the system of quality management extend to such engagement. However, these other type of engagement or the personnel who are working on, or the team members who are working on those engagement might be affected by matters relating to the firm system of quality management. So, for example, the firm's policies or procedure may prohibit the performance of certain non-audit services for clients for whom the firm performs audit or review of financial statement or other assurance engagement. The other example could be for the allocation of the resources. So SQM1 addresses human resources and technological resources. As a result, the firm's IT function and human resource function may be affected by the SOQM, because now, as Lalit mentioned about, it is an additional investment, and now the new component relates have put a lot of focus on the technological resources, intellectual resources. So this is about the various engagement which are covered within the overall system of quality management and the scope of the SQM1. And now I'll pick up another question for Lalit. You mentioned about the risk-based approach, and you took an example also about the risk-based approach. So can you just explain some of the factors which a firm should consider when identifying and assessing quality risk? You're on mute, Lalit, so you'll have to.
So there is guidance given in the firm, right? In the standard itself, what are the things that you should consider? I think when I practically look at it, the first thing that I would want to see is the type and size of clients that we service, right? So if you are a firm that is auditing 25 listed companies, you probably are within the purview of NFRA, and therefore that's one factor that goes into your mind. If you are a firm that has got 5 offices across the country, which means that you will need to make sure that all the 5 offices are able to deliver same quality, right? So there could be different risks that may arise. You may also have a situation where you have decided that you will not do audit services for listed clients, for example, or the entities which are non-NFR, which are NFRA covered. So that's a different scenario, right? So these are the factors that you would normally consider, right? Number of people that you deploy. Like I said, from where you are hiring, right? You may have a policy that you may lay down that you will only work with newly qualified chartered accountants, or you will not take article trainees, which means that you will not have to deal with the lower level kind of risk. So it really depends on what are the things that you are surrounded with, and considering all those factors, uh, you determine what is the risk. The other important component of doing a risk assessment is two things that you have to also always consider. Whenever you are seeing a risk, see the possibility of occurrence. So is it likely to occur in my scenario, depending on the situation I am in or the firm is in? First, the possibility of occurrence. Second is, if it occurs, what is the significance of this, right? Can it lead to poor quality audits? Can it fail the system of quality management? If yes, then it is a risk that you are required to specifically respond. So I think these are the broad factors that you will keep in mind when you are doing your risk assessment.
Thanks, Lalit. And I agree that it is important to maintain that list of the condition, event, or circumstances action, which is also given in the standard. And you pick up some very relevant example, which may affect the achievement of a quality objective and which the firm would need to understand and further consider whether a quality risk exists. So, so now I'll again move to Amit and ask one more question from him that you mentioned about the documentation, you mentioned about the role of EQR. So what kind of communication should the EQR have with the engagement partner? And are there any specific timing requirement for such communication in the new standard?
I think from a communication perspective and from a documentation perspective, let me start with communication. So from a communication perspective, it has to begin right from the planning. The EQR is expected to have complete comfort on the understanding of the business, the operations, and for that, even if he needs to communicate directly with the engagement team, and I'm saying engagement team, not with the engagement partner. Engagement partner, of course, he should have a direct line of communication with the engagement partner, but he needs to now dirty his hand. He needs to be available at the granular level, at the ground level, and understand. And once the business understanding is done, then in terms of risk assessment, what kind of risk has been identified by the engagement team, what kind of procedures are planned, and if he is able to add value through his experience, all those things needs to be there. He has to be there in the kickoff meeting. He has to be there in other significant meetings. He has to keep a tab in terms of what kind of resources have been deployed with. He has to keep a tab in terms of how competent the resources are. So it goes much beyond just the checkbox exercise. It goes much beyond the technical aspect. It goes into the non-technical aspect. It goes into the softer aspects. Basically, anything. What is the risk assessment? Risk assessment, one is, of course, flowing out of the engagements. The other is who's performing that engagement. I think both of you also touched upon the softer aspect, the human resources skill and the trained people and all those things. EQR is one person who has all the authority, the legal authority, the authority by the standards to question the team and to ensure that there are adequate staffing on the ground. And when I say adequate, it is just not the numbers, it is the quality of the people. So right from the planning, and then if we can add value to, and then one of the things that I touched upon is the professional judgment. So all those areas where professional judgments have been taken by the engagement team or by the engagement partner, those needs to be assessed. And when I say assessment, it has to be, so the idea is that the law has given this provision that there has to be an independent person ensuring that the engagement team is appropriate and fit. So for that, the discussion needs to take place, the communication needs to take place, the documentation needs to take place in terms of what happened in the meeting with the EQR and what kind of suggestions were given, what kind of exchange of what kind of exchange of dialogue took place, and then what is actually happening on the ground in terms of execution. So it starts from there, and then the EQR needs to also ensure in terms of his communication. He should be comfortable with the auditor's report and the consultations, whether the consultations are required as per the firm's policies. Those consultations are done or not done. Few of the procedures, policies and procedures do suggest, like in our firm, one of the policy procedures is that the consultation needs to be also first cleared by the engagement EQR, so that tomorrow we don't land up in a situation where there is a disconnect between the EQR and the engagement team. So of course, this is expandable. It's completely expandable with one single objective, is the quality of the engagement. So primarily all these, Deepa.
Yeah, thanks, Amit. And I want to touch base about one important aspect covered in SQM1, and probably then we'll come to the monitoring and remediation part, which is very extensive. The network requirements. So
Yes.
the standard, the SQM1 contains a very important requirement about and deals with the network. And I would like to highlight here, there is no change from the corresponding international standard here. So the SQM1 addresses the firm's responsibilities when the firms belong to a network, and the firm complies with the network requirement or uses network services in the system of quality management or in the performance of the engagement. The other aspect which is covered by SQM1 is that uses resources from a service provider. So for example, if it's a small firm and you want to use the services of an expert, or maybe you need the IT services or the support services, or any kind of a work where you want to engage with another firm, then it also deals with the use of the resources from a service provider in your entire system of quality management or in the performance of the engagement. So even when the firm complies with the network requirement or uses the network services or the resources from a service provider, the firm is responsible for its system of quality management. So the standard puts a specific focus that, okay, you can look at the network controls, you can use the network controls which are being implemented, you can follow them. You can look at the the other service provider, but the ultimate responsibility remains with the respective firm for the implementation and the effective implementation of the system of quality management. The term network and the network firm are defined in SQM1. A network firm is a firm or entity that belongs to the firm's network. And SQM1 explains that the networks and the network firm may be structured in a variety of ways. Any network requirement or network services that are obtained from the network, another network firm, or another structured organization in the network are considered network requirements or network services. So as a result, in order to place reliance on the network requirement or network services used in the standard of quality management, it is important that the firm understand the requirement first. What are the network requirements? What are the network services, and the impact they may have on the firm's SOQM, the system of quality management. The firm also needs to understand their responsibilities for any action that are necessary to implement the network requirements or use network services. So this is one very important component which is there in the standard. There is a detailed guidance what has to be done. If there are any gaps, do you need to implement and the additional controls at the firm level. So for example, you may have an additional requirement as per your local policy. Take an example of rotation as per Indian Companies Act. Now that is something which is a requirement under the Indian Companies Act, and you may have to implement an additional control to make sure that you are adhering to the mandatory rotation policy, which is specified in the Indian Companies Act before you are appointed as the statutory auditor. So, so this is on the network, and probably this is one of the important aspect. And now, in the interest of time, I would like to cover a very important aspect. And first, I'll ask one question from Lalit on the monitoring side. So we understand that the existing SQC1 talks about monitoring, and it is in the form of inspection of completed engagement. So that's the element which is covered in the SQC1 currently. But as I understand, there's a lot of focus on the monitoring and remediation. So can you just suggest about the new monitoring component which is there in the SQM1, and what is the most efficient way to set up a monitoring process under SQM1? So over to you, Lalit.
Okay, so I think I'll respond to the first point. Under SQC also, the monitoring mechanism that is defined includes all the components of SQC. So under SQC, when the firm assigns the responsibility, operational responsibility of the system of quality control and monitoring, the monitoring has to happen for all the components of SQC1. And then selection of completed engagements once in a period of 3 years is the minimum requirement, is one of the things that has to happen. Same things are applicable in this scenario. I think SQM1, there has to be a monitoring. There has to be, whenever monitoring is done, you will have some findings. Each of the findings is required to be evaluated for the root cause. And when the finding is evaluated, it can tell the firm that some of the policies and procedures in the firm are deficient, or people are not aware about some policies and procedures, or certain policies and procedures are required to be newly implemented, right? Or maybe there are engagement specific issues that need to be dealt with. So findings from monitoring can indicate a lot of things that a firm is required to be doing, which has not changed from the previous SQC1 monitoring versus SQM1. So engagement are still going to be monitored like that. But insofar as the testing of the other components of system of quality management is, you literally have to follow the approach given by the guidance note on testing of internal controls. So for example, if you have laid down policies and procedures around client and engagement acceptance as required by SQM1, so you will pick up a sample of 25 clients accepted during the year and test whether all the policies and procedures that you have put in place have been complied with when those client and engagement and acceptance were done. If you find any deficiency therein, then evaluate why the deficiency occurred and what was the root cause and remediate. So this is what the requirement is under SQM1. So the only testing methodology and the documentation requirements have undergone a change, to my mind. Otherwise, everything else remains the way it was in the earlier standard. One new requirement that we have seen, and it's not new, possibly it was, implied in the earlier standard. There is a concept of monitoring, which means somebody who is doing the monitoring activities in the firm and making sure that everything that has been designed and implemented is operating effectively, have a monitoring of that person also and the work that the person is doing, whether monitoring itself is appropriate. And this is where the ultimate responsibility and accountability of the firm's leadership comes up on the system of quality management. Deepa, I hope I have answered your question. You want to add anything?
Yeah. Thanks, Lalit. I think, it's quite extensive. And as you mentioned, we already have some components in SQC1, but definitely it requires much more monitoring and the communication of the deficiencies identified through that monitoring. The other aspect which I just want to add is who performs the monitoring activities. So SQM1 does not specify who is required to perform such monitoring activities. However, the standard does specify that the firm needs to have policies or procedures dealing with the competence and capabilities, including sufficient time of the individuals for performing such activities, and the objectivity of the individual, which means you will have to identify the person who will be responsible for doing those inspection of the engagement or monitoring of the policies. You mentioned about monitoring of the monitoring, which means the various new policies which the firm will formulate or will strengthen its policy because of the new standard will have to be monitored on a base at a point in time, and basis that if there are any deficiencies that has to be communicated, rectified, root cause analysis has to be done. So there is a whole lot of requirement, and everything what the firm will need to do now has to be supported by a documentation. So if there is a deficiency, then did the firm have, whether the firm has conducted a root cause analysis? what are the reasons and how the firm has acted in rectifying those deficiencies. And that will impact the overall annual assessment of the firm. Yeah.
This was there in SQC1 also, Deepa. And the other thing you have rightly touched upon is so when we talk about assigning responsibilities for each of the components, right? And there are specific statements in the SQM1 that says assign the responsibility for independence and ethics, assign the responsibility for managing risk and overall accountability. Just for whosoever is assigned, I think the firm, the documentation since you have touched upon, the firm will need to maintain that if Amit Mitra ji is appointed as the Chief of Risk and Quality for the firm, he's been appointed based on his qualification, experience, and this is the time that is available with Amit to deliver the system of quality management or manage risk. All that has to be signed off. Assignment does not happen like, okay,
Absolutely.
it's not a verbal thing. That's
Yes.
what a biggest change will come in. And 1 year later, the firm will have to show when the monitoring results came in, Mr. Amit Mitra was evaluated based on the performance of the system of quality management. What did you actually do? What were your responsibilities? So all that has come into place in SQM1 in terms
I
of
think,
monitoring.
I think one question similar to that, and probably Deepa, you can answer that, is on the governance and leadership. Of course, because quality being the basic premise. So on a softer aspect, what actions can the firm take to establish the culture that promotes a commitment to quality?
Yeah.
So how
Thanks,
can, because this is something it could vary from a smaller firm to a larger firm, or even between the larger firm and smaller firm. What do you think? And then we can.
Yeah, thanks, Amit. Thanks for asking this question. And as you also touched upon, and I also mentioned earlier, the tone at the top is very important. There is an important focus on leadership, and Lalit also mentioned that leadership responsibility, understanding is very, very important. And therefore, this establishing a culture is very, very important which will drive the commitment to quality. So the nature and extent of the action taken to establish a culture will vary from firm to firm. And obviously, there is a scalability provision inbuilt within the standard so that it can be applied both in the large firm, small firm, mid-size firm. So, however, at a minimum, the individual assigned the ultimate responsibility and accountability for the system of quality management, whether it's a CEO or your managing partner or any other senior partner, that person is required to demonstrate a commitment to quality through their actions and behavior because of the importance of setting the appropriate tone at the top. Now, this individual is also required to establish the expected behavior of the personnel relating to the performance of engagement and activities within the system of quality management. For example, through a code of conduct. So, firms should have a code of conduct governing the expected behavior of the personnel. There are many other actions that may be taken to establish the culture of the firm. For example, defining the purpose and value of the firm. So, what is the purpose? What are the firm's values? Establishing trust through consistent, regular, and open communication with the firm, within the firm. So if there is something on which the team members or the partners need to be updated, there should be an open and transparent communication. Establishing accountability at the top, and therefore it is very, very important. And the standard also touch base about the evaluation of the performance of the persons who are responsible for the implementation of the new standard. So it even talks about the annual evaluation. So providing transparency within the firm about the firm's action to address quality and the effectiveness of those action. So it's the tone of the leadership at the top is very, very important, and how the firm is, driving that, how the firm is acting on if there is any event happening or if there is any deficiency, what the actions are being taken. That is something very important.
Oh, very well explained, Deepa. So a similar question to this, similar, when I say similar, I mean more on the governance side. So does that also, so any technological resources used by the firm, are these, everything is covered in SQM1, or is there something which can be left out, something which can be carved out?
Yeah. So as we touch base upon in our deliberation that now the resources have been expanded and they cover the technological resources as well. The scope of technological resources that SQM1 aims to address are those technological resources that supports the firm system of quality management, including the performance of engagement. So ordinarily, firms will have technological resources that support the functioning or operation of the firm itself, such as email, which are not intended to be within the scope of the provision of SQM1, as these are more general in nature and not specifically used in fulfillment of the objective of the standard. Nevertheless, some technological resources may serve multiple purposes across the firm and may affect the firm system of quality management. So for an example, the firm's IT infrastructure may include security features that control access to IT application that are relevant to the firm system of quality management, for example, electronic engagement files. The firm would need to apply then its professional judgment in determining which technological resources or aspects are in the scope of SQM1. So that is something which firm needs to identify and which resources will be covered.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for this.
Thanks,
Lalit, are you there?
Yeah, I'm there.
So Lalit, on the documentation part, I mean, you talked about, so only thing is that where do we draw the line? I mean, how can the firms ensure that the documentation is not overly burdensome, while still being in compliance with SQM1? And the Indian firms are small or very small, or small to writership firms or two partner-driven firms. What is your advice there?
I
Because
think
it is a cost also.
Okay. So we have seen there are some systems available for enterprise risk management, and they can be tailored for SQM1. But if you are a 2-partner firm or a 5-partner firm or even 20-partner firm, my personal choice would be to have the system well documented in an Excel file. Okay, which means have it for all the objectives, identify your risks, determine what is the probability of occurrence and then impact of significance, document your risk rationale and response, and then attach the design and implementation of what the evidence of what you have designed and implemented. The only challenge of keeping in Excel is the version control and the safekeeping. How do you do that? Because you will have to demonstrate to regulators. If tomorrow your firm goes for a peer review or it is inspected by NFRA, you will need to show that the system of quality management existed 3 years back. So for example, if the firm is inspected in 2027 and 2025 was the mandatory date, I will have to show it existed. And because whatever I will put in place in 2025 will surely change in 2026, will surely change during 2026 also. So it will be an ever evolving. So that is, I think, a very big challenge if you want to maintain in Excel. There have to be very tight archives kind of control, that system locked or a password protected, not edited. You will have to show the trail. And audit trail is favorite topic. All of us know. Tomorrow regulator will ask, show me the trail that you have not.
That in an Excel file.
Show me the trail that you have not created this documentation now. Was it existing at that point? So I think samples, whatever you are testing, because see, ultimately, somebody who is responsible for the firm system of quality management will have to sign an opinion at the end of the year, each year, to say that there are no significant deficiencies or material weaknesses or findings in my system of quality management, or saying that's a qualified opinion. The way we opine on the financial statement, the way we opine on internal controls over financial reporting, right? We've tested. It's a self-certification that the firm does. We have tested our internal controls and we have not found anything. The controls are operating effectively. Therefore, it provides the firm with reasonable assurance that the engagements done will comply with the standards and all those things. So that kind of opinion has to be written, documented, signed, and kept on and archived.
Right. Right.
And that, so requirements are onerous. I think one will have to navigate. And I'm sure as people read through the standard, I think there are many support systems that are going to come up. I'm sure Institute will also provide some more guidance and support to members to implement this. But requirement is onerous. It can range from maintaining an Excel file to a complex system. Choice is entirely the firm's. That's the beauty of it. That's what the scalability and management is all about.
Right. And again, question, let's say for someone who's let's say about to start, let's say a firm, a small firm, maybe 5 partners or so, and they have maybe 7 or 8 listed entities. And then the cost is always a constraint there. So, basis your experience, what would be the, let's say, the most common pitfalls in terms of those you talked about to do's. What are those not to do's in terms of saving the bandwidth, saving the time, and of course saving the resources and all?
Very relevant question, Amit. I think not to do is not to make it overly complicated. Don't think it is a big standard running into so many pages. There are 2 implementation guides that have been issued to us. So if you are a 5-partner firm doing 20 listed company, I'm just giving a wild guess. Possibly, system of quality management should get documented. If I were to write on a A4 paper, maybe a manual separate, which is a quality control manual kind of thing that you will make, which is there. You have to have documented policies and procedures, but risk and response template should be what? Not more than 20, 30 pages. And you are laughing.
There is no right or wrong answer, actually. You're right.
There is no right or wrong answer, but it will really depend on what kind of,
Yeah.
like I said, the factors that you need to. So may not be a very, very elaborate. So suppose if the firm is in one city only, right? You do not have many offices. Then don't overcomplicate. Just think about this is an objective which is stated in the standard, and the standard expects the firm to comply with it. How am I complying with it? How am I ensuring? So I will call it bottoms up working. How am I ensuring that I'm meeting this objective? And when you answer that, how am I ensuring that, you will get to know what are the things that you need to document. So that is easiest way to see as is situation and making sure it gets documented.
Sure. Great. Deepa or Anand, we have questions.
No, I think I just want to say, and probably then I'll request you and Lalit to give your closing remarks as well, that I think these are very, very comprehensive standards. Obviously, when these have been formulated, the IAASB took number of years, and AASB also took quite a significant time to even look at the requirement, customize, look at what are the repercussions or the implication when it will be implemented for the country. So therefore, it's very important to start reading the standard to understand the requirement of the standard, how it is different from the SQC1, and then start implementing it. And somewhere it is very clear that it will take significant amount of time. Yes, it will vary depending on the firm and the size, as Lalit mentioned, Abid mentioned. The SQM1, SQM2, these are very, very important standard, and the objective is to enhance the quality. So you can have a look at the implementation guide, and I'm sure, as Lalit mentioned, ICA will issue some more guidance for the members by the time before the implementation date approaches. So that's all, and I would like to thank everyone, and probably I will hand it over back to Amit and Lalit for their closing remarks. Thank you.
No, thank you, Deepa. Thank you. I think from the way I see this is that it's time for all of us as chartered accountants, as chartered accountant firms, practicing firms. It is now time for us to elevate ourselves to the next level, because that's the expectation of the street. That's the expectation of our regulators or the stakeholders. And we need to, if we are to do the attest function, we need to live up to the expectation. Now, moving back to these standards. So these standards are all well knit and integrated standards. Let's say, for example, SQM1 and SQM2, one needs to read it in tandem with the relevant ethical requirements, which is kind of well knitted in terms of it talks about when do we have a self-review. So there has to be complete understanding. Gone are the days where you just pick up the audit and then start moving backwards in terms of creating documentation. Now, the creation of documentation will have to move to, let's say, it has to preclude, the firm will have to set up the policies and procedures and knit it well with the ethical requirements. And you would have seen any regulatory order from NFRA. The first 4 pages are from the ethics So it may be a self-review threat, it may be a familiarity threat, it may be an intimidation threat, or kind of any long association threat. Everything gets covered and it's well knit. So it's just not these two standards, it's the other standards. I say 220, 315, 330, ethics, so all those standards one would need to cover, but do it slowly. I mean, the idea is not to scare anyone, but the idea is to acquaint that there is enough material, there is enough support available by the institute, there are enough professionals available, there are enough videos available on the YouTube. One would need to take baby steps to reach to a desired level, because that is the expectation from us as chartered accountants. Lalit, over to you.
Right. I think, thank you so much, Deepa, Amit. I think for all of us, it is really very important to see from where the standards are coming. Okay. And at the core of it is public interest. There are a lot of responsibilities on the firm. I think my closing take is that there has to be a lot of conversation between the professionals, amongst the firms, at various forums, to come to a common understanding of how we are going to implement it, right? It's a wonderful situation to be in the sense that we've got a chance to have a relook at our systems, quality control policies, procedures. No doubt, this is going to increase the costs for the firm, but it is going to exponentially increase the quality of the delivery that you do. When you deliver quality engagements, your clients are going to be happy. I think it is going to give us more fees in the market. And overall, the profession will progress towards attaining maturity, which to my mind is very important, keeping in view the environment in which chartered accountants and practicing chartered accountants are operating. So my take is, let's read, understand, discuss, debate, implement it with the right spirit in all our firms, and make sure that we emerge as a strong profession in the country, to say that we comply with quality control standards is what I would say.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Anilji, back to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, sir. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, it was wonderful deliberation and well deliberated by all the learned speakers. So thank you so much, Amit sir, for your wonderful experiences as insight shared by you. Also, thanks to Lalit Kumar sir for sharing his valuable time and sharing his insight as well as the expertise with all our learned members. In absentia, Madam Deepa Agarwal ji for sharing her thoughts on SQM1 as well as her expertise. So thank you so much on behalf of Auditing and Assurance Standard Board to all the learned speakers for sparing a valuable time and enlighten all our members regarding SQM1 and SQM2. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank
Namaste.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.